The year was 1814, and a brutal winter had brought England to its knees. The River Thames had frozen solid, and relentless snowdrifts swallowed carriages whole along the desolate country roads. It was a season of mourning for many, but for Lady Genevieve Stirling, it was the genesis of a terrifying survival. Bound for an arranged marriage that felt entirely like a death sentence, her carriage shattered in a blinding midnight tempest. Half frozen, she dragged herself through the drifts and pounded on the heavy oak doors of an estate she believed was her destination. But the man who opened the door was not her betrothed. He was Arjun Patel, the exiled Duke of Ravenscroft, a man society whispered had murdered his own blood. The wind howled across the Yorkshire moors like a chorus of the damned. It was January, the pinnacle of what history would later record as the Great Frost. Inside the swaying carriage, Lady Genevieve Stirling clutched her velvet cloak tighter around her trembling shoulders. The cold was a physical entity, seeping through the floorboards and biting at her kid leather boots. She was 22, stripped of her family's wealth by her father's gambling debts, and currently being shipped off to Briarcliff like a parcel to settle the ledger. Her intended was Lord Silas Harrington, a man twice her age, with a reputation for ruthlessness that rivaled the current blizzard. "We cannot press on, my lady," the coachman, an older man named Higgins, shouted over the roar of the gale. The carriage lurched violently, the horses screaming in panic as the wheels lost their grip on the ice-slicked road. "We must find shelter," Genevieve yelled back, her breath pluming white in the freezing air. "Is Briarcliff close?" "Another 5 miles, perhaps," Higgins cried, "but the horses are done for." Before Genevieve could formulate a reply, a deafening crack splintered the night. The carriage pitched sideways with terrifying speed. Genevieve was thrown against the wooden paneling, her head striking the window frame. Glass shattered. The world tilted into darkness, filled with the sounds of snapping timber and the frantic whinnying of trapped beasts. When Genevieve regained her senses, the silence of the snow was absolute, broken only by the whistling wind. She crawled from the wreckage, her hands bleeding and numb. Higgins was nowhere to be seen, likely thrown into the deep drifts in the ravine below. The horses had snapped their traces and fled. She was utterly alone. Despair threatened to swallow her, but the Stirlings were not bred to simply lie down and die in the snow. Squinting through the blinding white squall, she spotted a faint, flickering amber glow in the distance. A house. It had to be Briarcliff. Silas had mentioned his estate sat atop a jagged rise. Gathering her torn skirts, Genevieve began the tortuous trek. The snow was up to her thighs. Every step was a battle against the elements. Frost formed on her eyelashes, and her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Minutes stretched into an eternity, her vision blurred, black spots dancing at the edges of her sight. Just a little further, she chanted internally. Just to the door. She breached the tree line and fell against wrought iron gates that stood half open, groaning in the wind. Beyond them loomed a massive stone structure. It did not look like the modern Palladian home Silas had boasted of. It was older, a sprawling Gothic behemoth of dark stone, ivy, and imposing gargoyles that seemed to sneer down at her from the parapets. But the cold was claiming her mind, and she had no capacity for architectural critique. Genevieve dragged herself up the wide, stone steps, her frozen fingers weakly gripping the heavy brass knocker shaped like a raven's head. She let it drop once, twice, before her knees gave out. She collapsed against the heavy oak door, the ice finally claiming her consciousness. She did not feel the door pull inward. She did not feel the rush of warm air, nor did she see the tall, imposing figure silhouetted by the roaring fire in the grand foyer. Arjun Patel, the Duke of Ravenscroft, stared down at the crumpled, half-frozen woman on his threshold. For 5 years, he had lived in absolute isolation at Blackwood Manor, exiled by society and his own demons. He was a man made of sharp edges and bitter silence. "And what the devil has the storm dragged in?" he murmured, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that had not spoken to a stranger in half a decade. He knelt, brushing the snow from her pale face. She was beautiful, though currently possessed the pallor of a corpse. With a heavy sigh that conveyed his immense irritation at this intrusion, Arjun scooped her into his arms. She weighed practically nothing. He kicked the heavy doors shut against the storm, sealing them both inside the shadowed halls of Blackwood. Genevieve woke to the scent of burning cedar and chamomile. The transition from the freezing abyss to sudden enveloping warmth was so jarring she gasped, bolting upright. Pain flared in her temple. "Easy, child. You are safe," a gentle voice urged. Genevieve blinked, her vision focusing on an elderly woman with kind, crinkled eyes, dabbing her forehead with a warm cloth. She was in a massive, 4-poster bed draped in heavy burgundy velvet. The room was cavernous, lined with tapestries and lit by a roaring fire. Where am I?" Genevieve croaked, her throat raw. "Is this Briarcliff? Is Lord Harrington here?" The elderly woman's hands stilled. A shadow crossed her face. "Briarcliff? Heavens, no. You are 10 miles off your course, my lady. You are at Blackwood Manor. I am Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper." Blackwood? Genevieve's heart stuttered. The name was infamous in London society. Then, the man who owns this estate is His Grace the Duke of Ravenscroft, Mrs. Gable said smoothly, though there was a protective edge to her tone. "He is the one who found you on the steps. You were half dead." Panic seized Genevieve's chest. The Duke of Ravenscroft, Arjun Patel. 5 years ago, the London papers had been obsessed with him. His younger brother, Edward, had perished in a suspicious fire at their London townhouse. Whispers claimed Arjun had locked the doors to secure the entirety of the dukedom for himself. Though the magistrates lacked the evidence to hang him, the court of public opinion had found him guilty. He was dubbed the Beast of Blackwood. "I cannot stay here," Genevieve whispered, trying to push the heavy quilts aside. "You will stay exactly where you are unless you wish to freeze to death." A cold, commanding voice echoed from the doorway. Genevieve froze. Leaning against the doorframe was the Duke himself. He was taller than she imagined, broad-shouldered and dressed in simple, stark black riding clothes that looked rumpled, as if he hadn't slept. His dark hair fell carelessly over his forehead, and his eyes, a striking, piercing grey, were locked onto hers with unsettling intensity. A thin, jagged scar ran from his left temple down to his jawbone, a permanent reminder of the fire that had taken his brother. He did not look like a murderer. He looked like a man utterly exhausted by his own existence. "I thank you for your hospitality, Your Grace," Genevieve said, trying to summon the aristocratic poise she was raised with, despite wearing a borrowed, oversized linen nightgown. "But I am expected at Briarcliff. My fiancé will be worried." Arjun pushed off the doorframe and walked slowly to the foot of the bed. He observed her like a strange, slightly annoying puzzle. Your fiancé is a fool if he let you travel in this weather. The roads are entirely impassable. The drifts are 10 feet high in the valley. You are trapped here, Lady Stirling. Genevieve Stirling. Arjun's eyes narrowed fractionally, the name clearly registered. The daughter of Thomas Stirling. You know my father. I know his reputation at the card tables. Arjun replied coldly, which explains why a beautiful, well-bred young woman is rushing through a deadly blizzard to marry a snake like Silas Harrington. A transaction, I presume. Genevieve flushed hot with shame and anger. You overstep, Your Grace. My family's affairs are none of your concern. They became my concern when you collapsed on my porch and forced me to play savior. Arjun countered smoothly. I do not like guests, Lady Genevieve. I like them even less when they belong to Silas Harrington. You will remain in this room until the storm breaks. Mrs. Gable will see to your needs. Do not wander the manor. He turned on his heel, his heavy boots echoing on the hardwood floor. I am not a prisoner, she called out after him. Arjun paused at the door, glancing back over his shoulder. The firelight caught the harsh planes of his face. In this weather, my lady, we are all prisoners. Consider yourself fortunate that your cell has a fire. For 3 days, the storm raged unabated, effectively entombing Blackwood Manor in ice. Genevieve, however, was not one to follow orders. By the 2nd day, her strength had returned, and her curiosity outweighed her fear of the brooding Duke. When Mrs. Gable was occupied, Genevieve slipped out of her chambers to explore the silent, shadowy halls. The estate was magnificent but neglected. Dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through frosted windows. The artwork was covered in white sheets, making the hallways look like they were populated by ghosts. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, she found herself drawn to a set of heavy double doors that had been left slightly ajar. Slipping inside, she found the library. It was the only room that felt alive, smelling of rich leather, old paper, and pipe tobacco. Books, floor to ceiling, lined the walls. But it was the desk in the center of the room that caught her attention. Scattered across the mahogany surface were ledgers, maps, and several letters bearing a seal she recognized instantly. The crest of Lord Silas Harrington. Why would the exiled Duke have correspondence from her betrothed? Unable to resist, Genevieve approached the desk. She picked up the top letter. It was dated 5 years ago, just weeks before the tragic fire that killed Arjun's brother. Patel, you're running out of time. The shares in the East India venture are mine by right. Transfer the deeds, or I will ensure your brother learns exactly how you managed to finance his little military commission. If you do not comply, the consequences will be severe. S. Harrington. Genevieve's breath hitched. Blackmail. Silas Harrington had been blackmailing Arjun. I recall giving explicit instructions about wandering. Genevieve dropped the letter as if it burned her. Arjun was standing in the shadows by the spiraling staircase, a decanter of amber liquid in his hand. He looked dangerous, a predator catching an intruder in his den. I lost my way. She lied poorly. He stepped into the light, his gaze dropping to the letter on the desk, then back to her face. You are an atrocious liar, Lady Genevieve, and a snoop. He was blackmailing you, she blurted out, unable to hold her tongue. Silas, before the fire. Arjun's jaw tightened. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocatingly tense. He set the decanter down with a sharp clack. You have 10 seconds to leave this room before I lock you in the cellar. He didn't just blackmail you. She pressed on, the pieces clicking together in her mind. Silas was ruthless. He had systematically destroyed her father's finances to force her into marriage. What would he do for a dukedom's fortune? Did Silas have something to do with the fire? Did he kill your brother? Arjun crossed the room with terrifying speed. Before she could step back, he was towering over her, his hands coming down flat on the desk, on either side of her, trapping her in. He smelled of whiskey and rain. "Listen to me very carefully," he snarled, his voice a lethal whisper, his face inches from hers. "You know nothing of this world. You know nothing of Silas Harrington, and you know absolutely nothing of me. If you speak my brother's name again, I will throw you back into the snow." Genevieve didn't flinch. She looked up into his stormy grey eyes, seeing past the rage to the agonizing, raw grief beneath. "Then tell me," she whispered fiercely, "tell me the truth. Because if that man is a murderer, he is the man my father is forcing me to marry." For a long moment, they stood locked in a battle of wills. The proximity was startling. Genevieve could feel the heat radiating from him, could see the tiny pulse beating at the base of his throat. Arjun looked at her, truly looked at her, and seemed to realize she was not a fragile society debutante. She was a woman fighting for her life, just as he had been fighting for his sanity. Slowly, the hostility drained from his posture. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of utter defeat. "Silas didn't start the fire," Arjun said quietly, looking away. "But he locked the doors. He paid the servants to leave. He wanted me dead so he could buy up the estate's debts from my naive brother. But I wasn't home that night. Edward was." Genevieve covered her mouth. "And society blamed you. I was the heir. I benefited. And Silas made sure the right magistrates received the right bribes to look the other way, while ensuring the newspapers got the truth." Arjun poured himself a drink. "I couldn't prove it. I still can't. So I retreated here to wait." "Wait for what?" Arjun looked at her, his eyes cold and resolved. "For him to make a mistake." By the fifth morning, the howling winds finally ceased. The great frost held its grip on the land, freezing the world in a pristine, glittering white silence. But the sky had cleared to a piercing, cloudless blue. Inside Blackwood Manor, the dynamic between the Duke and his captive guest had shifted drastically. The shared secret of Silas Harrington's true nature hung between them, a binding thread. Genevieve found herself seeking Arjun's company. They sat in the library for hours. He worked on his estate ledgers, and she read by the fire. She discovered that beneath the scarred, harsh exterior, Arjun was a man of sharp intellect and unexpected, dry wit. He played the pianoforte in the dead of night when he thought no one was listening, the melodies melancholic and hauntingly beautiful. Genevieve realized with a jolt of panic that she was dreading the thaw. The moment the roads cleared, she would be sent to Briarcliff. She would belong to the monster who had murdered Edward Patel. "You are quiet today," Arjun remarked without looking up from his paperwork. The morning sun caught the silver threads in his dark hair. "I am contemplating my impending doom," Genevieve replied dryly, staring into the hearth. Arjun's pen paused. He looked at her, a strange, unreadable emotion flickering in his eyes. "I will not let him marry you, Genevieve." It was the first time he had used her given name. The sound of it on his lips sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the winter draft. "You have no power to stop it," she said softly. "My father's debts can be paid by me." Genevieve turned to him astonished. You would buy my freedom? Why? Arjun stood, walking around the desk. He stopped a few feet from her, the invisible boundary they usually maintained, suddenly feeling very fragile. Because I have spent 5 years doing nothing while Silas Harrington destroys lives, and... He hesitated, his voice dropping lower. Because I have grown unaccustomed to the silence of this house. You have brought noise back to Blackwood. I find I do not wish for it to be quiet again. Before Genevieve could respond to the startling confession, the heavy thud of the brass knocker echoed through the manor. Both of them froze. Mrs. Gable is at the market in the village, Arjun muttered, his jaw setting. Stay here. Genevieve ignored him, following him out to the grand foyer. Arjun pulled open the heavy oak doors. Standing on the snow-swept portico were 5 men on horseback. They were heavily cloaked, their breath pluming in the icy air. At the center was a man Genevieve recognized with a lurch of terror. Mr. Crawley, Silas Harrington's chief enforcer. He was a brute of a man with a broken nose and cruel, flat eyes. Your Grace, Crawley sneered, tipping his hat. A crisp morning. We are here on behalf of Lord Harrington. Lord Harrington has no business at Blackwood, Arjun said coldly, blocking the doorway with his broad frame. Ah, but he does. Crawley smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. He leaned to the side, peering past Arjun to catch sight of Genevieve hovering in the shadows. I see you found the missing bride. We found the wreckage of her carriage 2 days ago, but the storm delayed our search. Lord Harrington is quite anxious to have his property returned. Property. The word made Genevieve sick to her stomach. Lady Genevieve is a guest, Arjun said, his voice dangerously level, and she is currently recovering. She will not be travelling. I'm afraid it wasn't a request, Your Grace. Crawley signalled his men, who shifted uneasily, hands moving toward the pistols tucked into their heavy coats. Furthermore, Lord Harrington sent us to retrieve certain documents. He believes you possess ledgers regarding the East India venture. He would like them back. Now, Genevieve gasped. Silas wasn't just here for her. He had realized Arjun still had the blackmail letters and the proof of the financial dispute. He was tying up loose ends. You are trespassing, Arjun stated, stepping out onto the portico and closing the door slightly behind him to shield Genevieve. And you are a murderer, hiding in a crumbling castle, Crawley spat. Hand over the girl and the papers, Patel, or we will take them. We have the magistrate's blessing to apprehend a known fugitive if he resists. I am a Duke of the realm, Arjun roared, his restraint finally snapping. And if any of you step foot inside my home, I will bury you under the snow. Crawley drew his pistol. Time seemed to slow. Genevieve didn't think. She reacted. She grabbed a heavy iron fire poker from the stand near the door and shoved her way past Arjun. Stop! She screamed, levelling the iron bar at Crawley. If you shoot him, Silas will hang for it. I have read the letters, Crawley. I know what Silas did to Edward Patel. If I do not return to Briarcliff willingly, my father will know, the London courts will know, and I will scream it to every magistrate from here to the Thames. Crawley hesitated, his eyes darting between the furious Duke and the wild-eyed, aristocratic girl wielding a fire poker. He hadn't expected the girl to know the truth. This complicated his orders. Silas wanted her untouched and compliant. Arjun looked at Genevieve, utterly stunned by her ferocity. She was standing in front of him, a shield of silk and steel. You have a choice, Crawley. Arjun said softly, stepping up beside Genevieve, gently placing his hand over hers on the iron poker, lowering it. His touch was warm and steadying. You can ride back to Briarcliff and tell Silas that Lady Genevieve has sought sanctuary with me, and that the ledgers are on their way to the Crown Prosecutor, or you can die on my steps. Choose. Crawley weighed the odds. 5 men against a duke on his own land was one thing. 5 men against a duke and a high-born lady who knew all their secrets was a disaster waiting to happen. Lord Harrington will not let this stand, Crawley growled, holstering his weapon. He will come for you himself. I am counting on it, Arjun replied. Crawley spat into the snow, wheeled his horse around, and signalled his men. They rode off down the winding drive, disappearing into the blinding white landscape. Arjun closed the heavy doors, turning the iron lock with a definitive click. The silence of the foyer rushed back in, but it was a charged electric silence. He turned to Genevieve, who suddenly dropped the fire poker. It clattered loudly against the stone floor. She was shaking violently, the adrenaline leaving her body. Before she could collapse, Arjun caught her. He pulled her flush against his chest, wrapping his arms securely around her trembling frame. You little fool, he breathed into her hair, his voice rough with emotion. You could have been killed. I couldn't let them take you. She whispered against his coat, her hands clutching his lapels. Arjun pulled back just enough to look at her face. The mask of the cold, exiled duke was completely gone. In its place was a man entirely undone by the woman in his arms. He reached up, his thumb gently tracing the line of her cheekbone. You changed my life the moment you knocked on my door, Genevieve, he murmured, his eyes dropping to her lips. And I will be damned if I let Silas Harrington take you from me. He kissed her. It was not a gentle, polite kiss of the drawing-room. It was fierce, desperate, and born of 5 years of isolation colliding with a sudden, overwhelming hope. Genevieve kissed him back with equal fervor, anchoring her hands in his dark hair. The winter storm outside had ended, but a much more dangerous tempest had just begun within the walls of Blackwood Manor. The kiss broke, leaving them both breathless in the freezing foyer of Blackwood Manor. The immediate peril had passed with Crawley's retreat, but a much darker, more insidious threat now loomed over them. Silas Harrington was not a man to accept defeat, nor was he a man to leave loose ends breathing. Arjun rested his forehead against Genevieve's, his hands lingering on her waist. We cannot stay here, he stated, the tactical part of his mind overriding the sudden intoxicating warmth of her proximity. Silas has wealth, and more dangerously, he has influence. He will not simply attack us with thugs next time, he will use the law. Genevieve stepped back, her mind racing. He will frame you. If he tells the local magistrate that you, the disgraced Duke, have kidnapped his betrothed. Exactly, Arjun agreed grimly. He controls the narrative. I need to get the ledgers and the blackmail letters to London, to someone Silas cannot buy. Who? She asked, following him as he strode purposefully back toward the library. Sir William Garrow, the Attorney General, Arjun said, pulling a hidden iron key from beneath his cravat. He walked to a large, imposing oil painting of his ancestors and pushed a concealed lever behind the frame. A small wall safe clicked open. Edward and I knew Garrow's nephew. The man is a staunch Puritan when it comes to the law. If I can get these documents to him, or to Viscount Sidmouth at the Home Office, Silas's web of bribery will unravel. Arjun withdrew a thick, wax-sealed leather portfolio. "This is the true ledger of the East India venture. It proves Silas funneled stolen company funds into his own accounts, using my brother's forged signature to cover his tracks. The blackmail letters prove motive. It is enough to hang him." Before Genevieve could process the sheer weight of the evidence, the heavy sound of the servant's door slamming shut echoed from the kitchens. Arjun's hand flew to a dueling pistol kept in his desk drawer, but a moment later, Mrs. Gable bustled into the library. The housekeeper was out of breath, her grey hair escaping her bonnet, her cheeks ruddy from the biting cold. "Your Grace," she gasped, clutching her heavy woolen shawl. "The village is in an uproar. I had to take the smuggler's path through the woods just to get back." "What has happened, Mrs. Gable?" Genevieve asked, rushing to help the older woman to a wing-back chair. "It is Lord Harrington," Mrs. Gable panted, her eyes wide with fear. "He rode into the village square an hour ago. He has declared to the magistrate, Mr. Stirling, no relation to you, my lady, that the beast of Blackwood ambushed your carriage in the storm and has taken you hostage." Arjun swore under his breath, slamming his fist onto the mahogany desk. "And the magistrate?" "He has rallied the local militia," Mrs. Gable confirmed dreadfully. "They are clearing the main road of snow as we speak. Lord Harrington is offering a reward of £500 to any man who helps rescue his bride. They are coming for you, Your Grace, under the banner of the King's law." The trap had closed. Silas had masterfully inverted the truth, using the very prejudices society held against Arjun to sanction a murder. If the militia stormed Blackwood, Arjun would be shot upon sight as a violent kidnapper, the ledgers would be conveniently lost in the chaos, and Genevieve would be dragged back to Briarcliff to be silenced through marriage. "We have to leave now," Genevieve urged, her voice trembling but resolute. "We can take the horses, ride north, away from the main road. We wouldn't make it 3 miles in these drifts," Arjun countered, pacing the floor. "And Silas will have men posted on the perimeter. He wants me trapped inside this house, just as Edward was trapped." Arjun stopped pacing. He looked around the dusty, silent library of the home that had been his sanctuary and his prison for 5 long years. His grey eyes hardened, the grief finally giving way to absolute, unyielding fury. "I ran 5 years ago because I could not prove my innocence," Arjun said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "I will not run today. If Silas Harrington wants to burn another Patel in his home, he will have to look me in the eye to do it." He turned to Mrs. Gable. "Bar the kitchen doors, lock the cellar grates. Genevieve, gather every lamp and candle we have. If they are coming in the dark, we will blind them with light." Night descended upon the Yorkshire moors like a heavy velvet shroud. The temperature plummeted, freezing the recently melted surface snow into a treacherous sheet of solid ice. Inside Blackwood Manor, the fires roared in the hearths, casting long, dancing shadows across the barricaded doors and windows. Arjun had systematically locked down the estate. Heavy oak furniture was piled against the grand foyer doors. He handed Genevieve a small, silver-handled pistol. "I cannot shoot a man," she whispered, staring at the cold metal in her palm. "You will not have to," Arjun promised, his hand briefly covering hers. "But you must protect yourself if we are separated. Point it at the center of their mass and pull the trigger. Do not hesitate." At 8:15, The silence of the moors was shattered by the baying of hounds and the crunch of heavy boots on the ice. Through a narrow slit in the drawing-room curtains, Genevieve saw them. Torches flickered like angry fireflies at the edge of the tree line. There were at least 30 men, some wearing the rough wool of the local militia, others wearing the dark cloaks of Silas's hired thugs. At the centre of the mob sat Lord Silas Harrington on a massive roan stallion. Genevieve's blood ran cold. He was impeccably dressed, a stark contrast to the rugged men around him, projecting an aura of absolute authority and manufactured grief. Patel. Silas's voice boomed across the snow, amplified by a speaking trumpet. The game is finished. Release Lady Genevieve, and surrender yourself to the magistrate, and I shall see to it you are not hanged from your own gates. Arjun stood by the window, entirely concealed by the shadows. He did not answer. He is trying to provoke you, Genevieve whispered, standing close behind him. Let him. Arjun replied softly. He is arrogant. It makes him impatient. When no response came from the dark, imposing manor, Silas signalled his men. Break the door, he commanded. A group of 6 men rushed forward, carrying a heavy felled pine log, using it as a battering ram against the front doors. The entire house shuddered with the impact. Boom! Dust fell from the ceiling. Boom! The wood groaned and splintered. They won't get through the front. I reinforced it with the iron fireplace grates, Arjun said quietly. They will try the conservatory next. As if on cue, the sound of shattering glass erupted from the east wing. The militia had smashed through the delicate panes of the botanical room. Stay here, Arjun ordered, drawing his sword. The steel hissed in the quiet room. Lock the door behind me. Before she could argue, he slipped into the hallway, moving with lethal silence toward the east wing. Genevieve locked the heavy drawing-room door, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She was alone in the dark, clutching the silver pistol, listening to the terrifying sounds of men shouting and steel clashing echoing through the cavernous house. Minutes bled by like hours. She heard a man scream in pain, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting the floorboards. Then, a sound that chilled her to the bone, not from the hallway, but from the window behind her. The latch of the drawing-room window groaned under intense pressure. A crowbar snapped the lock. The window swung open, letting in a blast of freezing wind and snow. A large figure clambered over the sill, landing heavily on the Persian rug. It was Crawley. Behind him, stepping elegantly through the breach his man had made, was Silas Harrington. Silas brushed a dusting of snow from his tailored wool coat, and looked around the dimly lit room until his eyes landed on Genevieve, who had backed herself against the marble fireplace, levelling the pistol at his chest. Genevieve, my dear. Silas smiled. It was a terrifying expression that did not reach his dead reptilian eyes. I have traversed half of England in a blizzard to find you. Put that silly toy down before you hurt yourself. Stay back, Genevieve warned, her hands shaking violently. I know everything, Silas. I have read the letters. I know you murdered Edward Patel. Silas's smile vanished. He shot a venomous glare toward Crawley. I told you she was a liability. He turned back to Genevieve, his voice dropping its aristocratic veneer, revealing the crude, ruthless man beneath. Edward was a weak fool who could not stomach the cost of doing real business, and his brother is a madman who will be shot tonight by the militia for kidnapping you. They won't shoot him when they see the ledgers, she spat. Silas chuckled darkly. "The ledgers will burn with this house, Genevieve, and sadly so will you, a tragic victim of the mad Duke's final desperate act. Crawley, take the gun from her." Crawley lunged forward. Genevieve squeezed the trigger. Click. A misfire. The powder was damp. Crawley laughed, snatching the useless weapon from her grip and backhanding her across the face. Genevieve crumpled to the floor, her vision exploding into stars, tasting copper in her mouth. Silas stepped over her, pulling a small flask of oil from his coat. "A pity," he murmured. "You would have made a very decorative wife." He began to pour the oil over the heavy velvet curtains and the piled furniture. "Light it," Silas ordered Crawley, striking a flint. Before the spark could catch, the drawing-room door exploded inward in a shower of splintered wood and broken hinges. Arjun stood in the doorway, breathing heavily, his white shirt stained with blood that was not his own. His sword was drawn, his eyes locking instantly on Genevieve on the floor, and then on Silas holding the oil. A guttural roar of pure, unleashed wrath ripped from Arjun's throat. He didn't speak, he simply charged. Arjun's charge was not that of a refined gentleman of the ton. It was the desperate, brutal assault of a man with nothing left to lose. He crossed the drawing-room in a fraction of a second, his sword flashing in the dim light. Crawley dropped the flint and lunged forward, pulling a heavy hunting knife from his belt. He slashed wildly at the Duke's chest, but Arjun deflected the blow with the hilt of his blade, stepping inside Crawley's guard. With a sickening crunch, Arjun drove his heavy boot into Crawley's knee. The enforcer howled, his leg buckling, and Arjun brought the heavy pommel of his sword crashing down against Crawley's temple. The brute collapsed onto the Persian rug, unconscious before he even hit the floor. But the distraction was all Silas needed. With a frantic, terrified strike, Silas struck the flint against the steel in his hand. Sparks showered onto the oil-soaked velvet curtains. In an instant, a wall of flame erupted, climbing the heavy fabric with terrifying speed and licking at the wooden ceiling beams. The room instantly filled with thick, acrid black smoke. For a singular, agonizing second, Arjun froze. The crackle of the flames, the suffocating heat, the orange glow illuminating the darkness. It was a flawless, nightmarish recreation of the night Edward died. The trauma gripped him, rooting his boots to the floorboards as the fire roared, threatening to consume him all over again. "Arjun!" The sound of his name, screamed in pure desperation, shattered the paralysis. He turned to see Genevieve staggering to her feet, coughing violently, her eyes watering from the smoke. She wasn't running toward the door. She was running toward the heavy oak desk, where he had temporarily placed the leather portfolio containing the ledgers. Silas saw her movement. Realizing the evidence was within reach, the older man drew a hidden derringer from his waistcoat pocket, leveling it at Genevieve's back. "If I hang Patel, you burn with nothing." Silas shrieked over the roar of the fire. Arjun threw himself forward. He tackled Silas just as the small pistol discharged. The bullet tore through the air, shattering a porcelain vase mere inches from Genevieve's head. Both men crashed into the burning debris of the barricaded furniture. Silas fought with the rabid panic of a cornered rat. He clawed at Arjun's eyes, his manicured hands turning into vicious talons. Arjun absorbed a blow to the jaw, tasting copper, but his strength was fueled by 5 years of righteous, simmering wrath. He pinned Silas by the throat, his grey eyes reflecting the inferno around them. "This ends tonight, Harrington." Arjun snarled, his grip tightening. "They will never believe you." Silas choked out, his face turning a mottled purple. "The militia is already inside. They will see a madman standing over a fire." "Arjun, the ceiling," Genevieve cried out. A massive burning beam groaned above them, the structural integrity of the old manor finally giving way. Arjun released Silas, grabbing him by the collar and dragging the coughing, sputtering man away, just as the beam crashed down exactly where they had been struggling. A geyser of sparks blinded them. Genevieve materialized through the smoke, clutching the leather portfolio to her chest like a shield. She grabbed Arjun's arm. "We have to go. Now." Coughing, Arjun hauled Silas to his feet, keeping a vice-like grip on the man's coat. He would not let this murderer escape into the night. Together, the three of them stumbled out of the burning drawing room and into the grand hallway. The scene outside the room was absolute chaos. The local militia had indeed breached the conservatory and were now swarming the foyer, their muskets raised. But the sight that met them was not what they expected. They saw the Duke of Ravenscroft, bleeding and scorched, half carrying a battered Lord Harrington, while Lady Genevieve Stirling, the supposedly terrified hostage, stood fiercely by the Duke's side, holding a thick ledger. "Hold your fire!" A booming, authoritative voice echoed through the smoky hall. Pushing through the ranks of the confused militiamen was Magistrate Stirling, looking highly alarmed, but he was not alone. Beside him stood a man whose presence made Silas Harrington visibly pale beneath the soot on his face. It was Sir Robert Peel, a prominent Under-Secretary of the Home Office, known for his unyielding incorruptibility. "What in God's name is the meaning of this madness?" Sir Robert demanded, coughing into a handkerchief. Before Silas could open his mouth to spin his web of lies, a familiar, battered figure limped through the front doors. It was Higgins, Genevieve's coachman. His head was bandaged, and he was supported by 2 local villagers. "That's him." Higgins pointed a trembling, frost-bitten finger at Silas. "That's the monster who paid off the postilions to sabotage the carriage wheels before we left London. He wanted her ladyship to freeze on the road so he could claim her dowry and inheritance without ever having to marry her." A shocked murmur rippled through the militia. Silas's eyes darted frantically. The trap had backfired spectacularly. Higgins had not died in the ravine. He had crawled to the neighbouring village of Oakhaven, where Sir Robert Peel happened to be residing for the winter season, and exposed the sabotage. Genevieve stepped forward, her dress ruined, her face bruised, but her posture entirely unbroken. She handed the heavy leather portfolio directly to Sir Robert. "Inside, Sir Robert, you will find Lord Harrington's private ledgers, detailing his embezzlement from the East India Company," Genevieve said, her voice ringing clear over the crackle of the fire. "You will also find letters proving he blackmailed the late Edward Patel, and correspondence that will undoubtedly tie him to the arson that took Edward's life 5 years ago. He came here tonight to burn the evidence and to murder the Duke of Ravenscroft." Sir Robert took the portfolio, his sharp eyes flicking to the terrified Lord Harrington. "Is this true, Silas?" "It is a forgery, a conspiracy," Silas sputtered, trying to wrench himself from Arjun's grip. "Patel is a madman. He kidnapped my betrothed." Genevieve turned to the magistrate and the militia. "I am not a hostage. I sought sanctuary at Blackwood Manor from a storm, and from a murderer. And I found a better man than society ever gave him credit for." Sir Robert sighed, gesturing to the militiamen. Arrest Lord Harrington. Seize his men. And someone fetch the local fire brigade before this magnificent estate is entirely lost to the ashes. As the militia moved in to shackle Silas, Arjun finally let him go. The heavy burden of 5 years of guilt, isolation, and unproved innocence lifted from his shoulders, leaving him feeling almost weightless. He turned to Genevieve, who was watching him with a mixture of immense relief and sudden, overwhelming exhaustion. Without a word, Arjun pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her smoke-scented hair, as the roof of the east wing collapsed in a shower of brilliant, triumphant sparks. Spring arrived late to the Yorkshire moors, but when it finally broke, it shattered the great frost with a breathtaking, violent beauty. The relentless snowdrifts that had imprisoned Blackwood Manor for months dissolved into rushing, crystalline streams that carved their way through the valleys. The land awoke in a vibrant explosion of green, and the wild heather began to bloom in defiant patches of purple along the jagged ridges. The damage to the ancient estate had been severe, but it was far from fatal. Where there had once been a suffocating, tomb-like silence, the air was now alive with the chaotic, wonderful noise of restoration. The ruined east wing swarmed with carpenters, stonemasons, and glaziers. The sharp, bright echoes of their hammers rang out across the courtyard, accompanied by the scent of freshly cut pine, lime mortar, and the rich, damp earth of the thawing gardens. Arjun Patel stood on the newly repaired stone portico, the morning sun warming his shoulders. He was dressed simply in a crisp white linen shirt and dark trousers, his jacket discarded in the unseasonable warmth. In his hand, he held a heavy parchment letter bearing the imposing wax seal of the crown. The past 3 months had been a grueling tempest of a different sort. The trials in London had been swift, highly publicized, and entirely merciless. Presented with the irrefutable evidence from the recovered ledgers alongside the damning testimonies of Mr. Crawley and the surviving carriage postilions, Silas Harrington's empire of blackmail and bribery had crumbled to dust. The court of peers had watched as Silas, stripped of his arrogant aristocratic veneer, descended into manic, desperate accusations. It had done him no good. He had been found guilty of grand embezzlement, sabotage, and the premeditated murder of Edward Patel. Silas was currently rotting in the damp, sunless confines of Newgate Prison, awaiting his final sentence, a broken, disgraced man who would never cast a shadow over their lives again. Yet as Arjun stared at the letter from London, a heavy knot of apprehension twisted in his chest. Throughout the ordeal, he had used his considerable previously dormant fortune to quietly settle matters behind the scenes. He had instructed his solicitors to hunt down and erase every last shilling of Thomas Stirling's disastrous gambling debts. The Stirling family estate was secure. Genevieve was entirely free. She was no longer bound by a catastrophic financial burden. She was no longer forced into a transactional marriage to save her father from debtor's prison. She possessed the wealth, the breeding, and the astonishing beauty to return to London society and claim whatever life she desired. She could have a flawless, unscarred gentleman, a life of endless ballroom waltzes, and a future entirely detached from the grim history of Blackwood Manor. The thought of her leaving terrified Arjun far more than the roaring flames of the drawing-room ever had. "You are staring at that parchment as if it might bite you." The warm, melodious voice pulled Arjun from his spiraling thoughts. He turned, the tension instantly draining from his rigid posture. Genevieve was walking up the wide stone steps, and the sight of her stole the very breath from his lungs. She wore a simple, elegant morning dress of pale blue muslin that caught the gentle spring breeze, outlining her slender silhouette. In her hands, she carried a woven willow basket overflowing with fresh white snowdrops she had gathered from the edge of the woods. The angry purple bruise that Crawley had left on her cheek was long gone, replaced by a radiant, healthy flush. The fierce, unyielding spirit that had compelled her to point a loaded pistol at a murderer still burned brightly in her eyes, but it was now tempered with a profound, quiet peace. She did not look like a woman plotting her escape to London. She looked entirely, perfectly at home. Arjun stepped down to meet her, unable to stop the rare, genuine smile that touched the corners of his mouth. He gently took the basket of snowdrops from her hands, setting it carefully on the wide stone balustrade. "It is from Sir Robert Peel," Arjun said, his voice a low, rough rumble. He held up the parchment, the seal broken. "The king has officially reinstated my family seat in the House of Lords. All formal charges against me regarding Edward's death have been publicly expunged from the records. Society has decided I am no longer a monster. It seems I am respectable once more." Genevieve stepped closer, the distance between them vanishing. She reached up, her cool, soft fingers gently tracing the faded, jagged scar that ran along his jawline, a permanent reminder of the fire he had survived and the brother he had loved. "You were never a monster, Arjun," she said softly, her gaze locking onto his piercing grey eyes with absolute, unwavering certainty. "They were simply too blind to see you, too frightened to look past the shadows to the man standing within them." Arjun caught her hand, his thumb stroking the delicate skin of her wrist, before he pressed a long, reverent kiss to her palm. He closed his eyes, savoring the warmth of her touch, grounding himself in the reality of her presence. "I was a ghost, Genevieve," he confessed, the raw vulnerability in his tone laying his soul entirely bare. "I was haunting my own life, waiting for the end of it, until you literally crashed into my world. You braved a blinding blizzard, fought off armed men with a fire poker, and stood against the whole of English society for me." He opened his eyes, looking down at her with a fierce, possessive tenderness that made Genevieve's breath hitch. "I have settled your father's ledgers," Arjun continued, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "You are completely free. You can go anywhere, be anyone. But I find I am a selfish man. I cannot imagine a single day in this life without you. I will not allow it." A slow, brilliant smile spread across Genevieve's face. Her heart was fluttering wildly against her ribs, a frantic rhythm of pure joy. She stepped smoothly into his space, resting her hands flat against the solid, reassuring warmth of his chest. "Is that a command, Your Grace?" she teased softly, arching a delicate brow. Arjun's hands came to rest on her waist, pulling her flush against him. The aristocratic restraint he had practiced for years melted away completely. "It is a plea," Arjun corrected, his gaze dropping to her lips before rising back to meet her eyes with profound, devastating sincerity. "Marry me, Genevieve, not as a transaction, not as a settlement of debts or a societal obligation. Marry me because you are the only fire that ever brought warmth back to Blackwood. Marry me because I love you, completely and irrevocably." Genevieve looked up at the man who had pulled her from the freezing snow, the man who had charged through a literal inferno to save her life. The terrifying tempest that had forced them together had long since passed, but the magnificent, unbreakable bond, forged in its crucible, would last a lifetime. She rose onto her toes, wrapping her arms securely around his neck, burying her hands in the soft, dark waves of his hair at the nape of his neck. "Yes," she whispered fiercely against his lips, erasing the last of his fears. "Yes, Arjun, always." As Arjun gathered her securely in his arms and kissed her under the bright Yorkshire sun, the last stubborn remnants of the winter ice finally melted away from the ancient stones of Blackwood Manor, washed clean and ready for a beautiful new beginning. The tale of Lady Genevieve and the Duke of Ravenscroft became a legend whispered in the grand ballrooms of London for generations. What began as a terrifying mistake in the deadliest winter of the century transformed into a profound testament to resilience and truth. They did not just survive the tempest. They conquered the societal rot that sought to destroy them. Arjun and Genevieve rebuilt Blackwood Manor not as a fortress, but as a beacon of warmth, raising 4 children who knew the true meaning of courage. Their love story proved that sometimes the wrong direction leads exactly where one is meant to be, and that even the deepest, coldest exile can be shattered by a single, brave heart willing to weather the storm.